Thousands have died and over 1 million displaced in Sudan. Now, this is fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces continue for 7 months now. Let's discuss this. We're joined by Pan-Africanist Ras Advocate Sipho Mantula from the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, for example, at the beginning of November, the UN Refugee Agency describing what is continuing to happen in Sudan as a crisis that continues to unfold and turning peaceful Sudanese homes into cemeteries. This is happening, of course, away from the eyes of the world mostly. In your view, why is it not getting the attention it should be given?
Evening, my dear sister Bongiwe. I think the issue of Sudan being muted or deleted in the global politics or in the global forums, whether it's the AU, whether it's the SADC, whether it's the BRICS, I think there have been attention. You will recall that there have been meetings in Saudi Arabia at Jeddah. There have been meetings in the South Sudan on trying to resolve this impasse. And our former President Thabo Mbeki also was embroiled in, he was dealing with the matter of the Darfur crisis at some point and the RBA. But when you look at the developments, the way I've picked up, we are talking about humanitarian crisis, but the question of Sudan, it is also losing what I called a UN Security Council or UN peacekeeping mission currency that they are calling now for that mission that is ending in a week's time. Since 2020, that has been in Sudan, since the removal of General Omar al-Bashir, that we have lost focus on Sudan. And I think, Bongiwe, maybe it's the nature of the global politics of your Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, that we lose focus on more humanitarian crises that we see even in the Eastern DRC. When you look at Congo, when you look at Mogadishu, when you look at the Sahel region. So broadly, you can say the African continent, we have a crisis of people being killed, young people, women, and the military being appetite for power. Because when you look at the conflict of Sudan, is there 2 military men who have been in power for more than 30 years, and they are also fighting to be at the helm of the presidency.
And I wonder then, how do we begin to respond effectively, particularly as a continent, to make sure that this issue is not lost? I mean, you think about the fact that, you know, this is a colossal humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Sudan and the many other areas that you have now mentioned. You think about Sudan just in this context, funds have dwindled. Aid supplies is also being choked. You think about the fact that we hear stories of women being raped. We hear stories of dead bodies lining up the streets. So what do we do as a continent to make sure that it is not forgotten?
I think our last hope might be in the IGAD group, because within the AU, again, Bongiwe, we have done a calculable mistake. You know, you might want to have sanctions against Russia, but Russia is still have influence in the UN Security Council. When we remove the Sudan from the AU, we have removed to even communicate with the Sudanese generals who are fighting. Yes, we see resolutions of the AU, but as we have pointed, the responsibility to can protect civilians, ordinary men and women in that country is a high priority of the African Union. And I think of the neighboring countries that will include Kenya, the South Sudan, Ethiopia, Djibouti. These are the countries that are also affected by the conflict. And now we see even the rise of the epidemic of cholera. So one will see also the challenge of this El Nino, also of the climate change in Sudan. So you have a couple of multi-challenges that are facing the North African countries. We saw earlier when we were talking with Imam at some point about Morocco. We even spoke about many countries in Africa, actually, that have been affected by climate change. But Sudan, I think, Bongiwe, it is a question of the political will of the neighboring countries. It is also the role of the civilian. And actually, I'll say to you, Bongiwe, last week I met with the former Prime Minister of Sudan, Hamdok, coincidentally somewhere. And when we met, what was running in my mind, I was saying, this was a civilian who was supposed to have restored Sudan in terms of it coming out of economic sanction, coming out being a terrorist state according to the USA. But also, Bongiwe, maybe my final parting shot, I don't know, the foreign countries have appetite towards Sudan. I don't think Sudan will ever find peace. More so, you have more countries, including the BRICS countries, have a serious appetite towards the crisis in Sudan. Either they have a national interest on the economy of Sudan or its natural resources.
I will not ask where the said meeting is, supposedly have taken place. But as a final question then, what does all of this that you've just described tell us about the state of the African Union?
It says to us, when we are looking at Agenda 2063, which came into effect in 2013, 10 years later, it's a serious indictment. The silencing of guns by 2030, Sudan being one of the, we'll say Sudan always was the first African country to get independence in 1956, but we always look at Ghana. It says a lot about Sudan as a liberated North Sudan. It also has an impact on the South Sudan, and that urges our heads of states who are in the neighboring countries, our former heads of states, to be concerned about Sudan, our African human rights bodies to be concerned about Sudan, our African media broadcasting houses to be concerned about the coverage of Sudan, so that we don't delete Sudan, we don't erase many African conflicts or African countries who are affected by conflicts. And this role of the AU, like I said to you, Bongiwe, we need to constantly assess the role of the peace architect, the peace and security architect of the AU. Is it working for the people, or is it working against the people of the African continent? But like I said to you, it seems Agenda 2063 was just a pipe dream. We are not reaching it. It's the same like in South Africa when you ask about national development plan. Does it also have the essence of the Agenda 2063? I doubt.